Sam Thomas Davis. I am very excited to have him here today. It will be all about habits and how you create them, how you do them, and how do you change habits that you have. So thank you very much, Sam, for joining us here. My first question was actually, how did you actually get started on this path? Well, like, how did you become an expert in how to change habits, how to establish new habits, and with that, of course, change your life? Sam Thomas Davis. I am very excited.
Well, firstly, thank you for having me, Jachym. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you for everyone else that's listening in as well. So, thank you for the very humbling introduction as well, but I have one consideration for expertise, and what I've realized is if you look at any discipline, if you profess to be an expert, there is an argument that you have learned everything there is to know. So I do consider myself to be very knowledgeable on this, but I do also consider myself to be a practitioner. The second reason why that is because what I noticed with a lot of behavioral science is, you can imagine, it's often written by academics, and academics aren't necessarily practitioners about. So a good example of this is confidence. If you read any book on confidence, it's usually written by a doctor or an academic, and they may be talking about scientific or psychological studies that have been done on this area, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they walked across a bar to talk to a woman or something like that. So we're probably going to come back to this a little bit more later on, but I really consider myself at the forefront to be a practitioner of this because I'm still making mistakes as well, and I'm learning new things all the time, a lot of which I haven't seen anywhere else, so it's quite exciting. So to answer your question, I got started in this probably, I've been coaching for about 6 years now, and one day I was looking at the clients who really excel in this area of their life and the clients that don't. And what I noticed was the clients that really excelled in this area of their life are the ones that made a real habit out of change. It's not enough to just do something sporadically. You have to do something on a consistent basis in order to really yield the results that you want. And I also came from this background myself where I had a lot of really bad habits. I did myself, and I became really fascinated by how I could change them in the long term. I used to bite my nails, go to bed really late, eat a lot of sugar, and not take action when I knew I should have done, and procrastinate terribly and so on. So we'll probably go into a little bit of detail about that today as well. And the reason why I wrote my book is because I noticed that there wasn't a lot on the application side of how to change habits. There was only one or two really known books, one of which, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, which is an absolutely phenomenal book. Maybe we can have a resources section that we can post on the YouTube video afterwards. And just absolutely blew my mind. A couple of the principles I'm going to talk about today as well. But I found that it was quite incomplete as well. And my goal for today is just to share as many actionable strategies that you can use even immediately after the call and start making some changes in your life.
Wow, thank you. That was really good. So let's get started with more look at, you have mentioned a habit cycle. What is it meant by that?
Okay, so what's really fascinating about habits is we have only in the last 10 to 20 years really learned about them and really understood what they are on a neurological level. So before, it tended to be a very fluffy word that no one could really define and only theorized. And MIT University in the 1990s decided to do a study on rats to try and identify what a habit really is, what is going on inside of the brain when a habit takes place. So what they did is They took a rat and they put wires inside of the rat's skull, something that was a very tricky procedure to do to begin with. And they placed the rat in a T-shaped box. So if you can imagine a T-shaped box like this, and at the end on the left side, so if this is the T here, there was a piece of chocolate, and on the right side was nothing. And what they did was, at the base of the T-shaped box, there was this little wooden partition, and what they would do is they would open the partition, and there would be a clicking noise, and the rat would very slowly scurry down the box very cautiously. It would get to the end of the box, it would look right, it would see there would be nothing there, it would look left, and then it would see that the chocolate was there, and it would get the chocolate. So they ran this study dozens and dozens and dozens of times, and here's what they found: that between the click of the partition opening and the rat finding the reward of the chocolate, its brain activity decreased. In other words, it was running an automatic behavior. So this idea of the habit cycle is the first step to understanding what habits are. So every single habit you have follows the same neurological loop. There's a cue, which is like a trigger. It's the reason why you do the behavior. There's the routine, which is the behavior in itself. And then there is the reward. Now, the reward serves two purposes. The first purpose is so that you have a reason to do the habit to begin with. So I'll give some examples of this in a minute. The second reason is so that your brain could encode this pattern into the neurology of your brain so that you don't have to think about it. So I know you're a hypnotist, Jachym. You're probably familiar with Miller's law, that you cannot process between 5 and 9 bits of information. Have you heard that before?
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we move on, because I think you said something important, is right. You have the trigger, you have the process, and then you have the reward, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. So how does that start to apply now with some bad habits we have, for example, like smoking? And I don't want to smoke, and I'm like killing myself, yet somehow I can't break this habit. So how does this work with the trigger and especially with the reward? Because at some point people are like, oh my god, I'm smoking again. Why is that?
Okay, very good example. So just before I touch upon that, I just want to mention as well that what happens is, in order for a habit to become automatic and therefore unconscious, your brain has to start craving the reward before you've even seen the cue. Now, smoking is a great example of this, and we'll probably touch upon this over the call today. So what is the cue or the trigger for smoking? For some people, it's an emotional state. When they feel stressed, when they feel social, when they feel nervous, that can be an emotional trigger. So the routine is they start smoking. The reward is the feeling of the nicotine rush. Maybe there are even rewards that you haven't even considered, such as maybe you feel more socially accepted if you smoke. I know a lot of people that start smoking and they know that it's unhealthy for them, but they really want to fit in, which just goes to show as well that we often know what to do, but we don't do what we know. So we engage more of our emotions than we do with our logic. We know smoking's bad for us, and we certainly know that in our 20s, and yet so many people start. So what's interesting as well with smoking, and we'll come back to this later when we talk about choice architecture, is there are multiple cues for smoking. And there was a study done into 5 different types of cues. So cues can be emotional states, they can be locations, they can be times of day, they can be the immediately preceding actions, and the 5th, which I can't recall right now because I think I may have already mentioned it, the main ones are usually people and emotional states. So if you are in a work environment, there's probably going to be a trigger for you to smoke. If you're at home, there's probably going to be a trigger for you to smoke. If you're out, there's probably going to be a trigger to smoke. So the reason why people find it so difficult to quit smoking, it's not because of the neurological craving that they have for the nicotine per se, because studies into that have shown that nicotine leaves the body after 3 days, but more so to do with the environmental cues, the societal cues, and also the emotional cues as well. It's not like a habit like biting your nails or eating junk food. There will only be a couple of cues for that. So to answer your question about how you can start to use this habit cycle, if we talk about firstly the approach to replacing bad habits. So we're going to talk today about habits, and there's two ways we can look at it: building new habits and replacing old ones. So what we've learned is you cannot eradicate a bad habit, but you can replace it. So this is exactly why we chew gum or we have a substitute when we're smoking, because you can't just eradicate it, because your brain needs a replacement reward. So, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So I understand correctly. So if I have of smoking, for example, I'm not eradicating, for example, the trigger. I'm just putting it into a different stream, right? So the process, instead of just grabbing the cigarette, is the trigger starts to, for example, oh, I will take the gum. Is that correct, or is that, do I understand that wrong?
So if you want to, I was thinking about doing this towards the end of the call, but I can touch upon this now. So, and this is a simplification of the process. I go into a lot more detail in the book. So, so the first thing, let's give it a framework. So the first thing you do is, okay, my bad habit is I'm a smoker. So the first thing you need to do is you need to identify all the cues for that habit. So when do I smoke? I smoke when I am with my friends. I smoke when I am on my lunch break in work. I smoke the first thing I do when I get home. I smoke when I have coffee in the morning. There may be 10, 15 cues. You write down what all the cues are. The second thing you do is you identify what the rewards you are getting are from that habit. Now, as mentioned before, what's interesting is the rewards that we believe that we are getting from certain habits aren't always the rewards in reality. So, for example, and I may have mentioned this earlier on as well, but this is what's really fascinating about habits is because they all follow the same neurological loop, your brain just can't tell the difference between the good and the bad. Habits take place in a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia doesn't have any autonomy. It just follows orders from the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex just gives it this cue, and the basal ganglia just runs it like a pattern. So you identify what the cues are, and you identify what the rewards are. The next thing you need to do is you need to replace the routine. So because there's so many cues, it'd be very hard to change all the cues, because some of them are independent to your intervention anyway. You have to go on your lunch and work, and you have to meet your friends and so on. So what you can do is you can introduce a different routine. Now, you have to experiment with what that new routine is going to be. So talk about in the book, the example I give is I was a nail biter. And what I did was I tried to find the replacement reward that would, the replacement routine that would still satisfy the reward I had. So, for example, instead of biting my nails, I would just leave my hands there and just see whether I got the same satisfaction. And incidentally, I did. It worked really well. But depending on your willpower as well, which I'll come back to in a little bit, you have to really experiment with what the replacement routine is going to be. I found that the replacement routine needs to be as compatible as the previous routine. So for example, let's say we're using this example of smoking. So this is why chewing gum or putting something in your mouth is such a suitable replacement, because it's so similar. I know some people may do yoga or practice a martial art or something like that when they feel the urge, because the urge is going to come based on all these cues, and that is independent to our control. And it might seem like an inconvenience, it might not seem like a good fit. So you have to do something that is similar. It's almost a way of tricking your brain in a way.
Okay, so it's basically like, because it's so similar, your brain, it's easier to adapt to that new routine, is that right? Like, because you grab the cigarette now, you grab the chewing gum, you put it even in your mouth. So it's so similar that it's easier to shift to that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to find a routine that is most conducive to you feeling satisfied. So what I wanted to touch upon as well is we're probably going to jump backwards and forwards on this call, so apologies if there's no linear narrative to this call, but one idea that I really wanted to talk about on this call was a lot of people will try and implement a new behavior into their life, and they do it the wrong way. Now, let's use an example of, again, we can use smoking, we can use a different example. What do you think?
Well, for example, one thing I realized when I teach, for example, self-hypnosis, a lot of people struggle just to do 5 minutes self-hypnosis each day, like twice a day. And I get a lot the question of, they ask me, how do I implement this habit? How do I can now do this habit? Or even exercise, just do a few minutes, instead of do a whole crazy exercise routine. But even then, some people struggle with it to actually establish such a routine. So absolutely, let's take, for example, exercise. You want to do just a small thing.
Okay, great point. Okay, so the first thing is, if we use exercise as an example, let's use somebody that considers themselves to be overweight. Now, the typical story is the person goes to the gym maybe for a few weeks and then they start making excuses and they stop going, right? That's the typical, like you say with your clients as well, they'll start making excuses and so on. So what I've found to be really effective is it's not enough to try and implement a new behavior into your life. You have to believe on an identity level that you are the kind of person that can make this change in your life. So I love using the example of, if my mum's watching this, she's going to be very flattered now. Listen to the language of people that really own the behaviors they do in their life. Okay, so my mum is a distance runner. She runs the London Marathon every year. She doesn't say, oh, yeah, I like to run. She says, I'm a runner. It's in her blood. It's on an identity level. So if she didn't run, it would be compromising who she is as a person. So the first thing you have to do is you have to look at your own beliefs. For example, another good example of this, we'll come back to exercise in a moment, is conversation skills. If you want to become charismatic with the opposite sex, if you don't believe that you are the kind of person that can do that to begin with, then no amount of practice, no amount of principles, no amount of technique is ever really going to amount to anything, because you're going to start to self-sabotage. So the way you do this is, it's not enough to just write, with exercise, for example. I've seen people, I'm a little bit on the fence about writing goals, and that's a whole other talk for another time, but people will write, okay, so they set these arbitrary dates to begin with, and they'll say, okay, so starting from Monday, I'm going to go to the gym every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I am going to, they don't even really specify what their metrics are. They just say, I'm going to go to the gym. They don't. There's a lot of ambiguity to what they're going to do. That's quite a lot of pressure for yourself. So everything that I teach is about making it as easy as possible for yourself. So what if instead you say to yourself, you know what, I'm the kind of person that doesn't miss a workout. It doesn't matter what I do when I get there. Even if I get there, and we'll come back to this a little bit later on when we talk about self-compliance, even if I get there and I go on the rowing machine for 5 minutes and then I leave, that's fine, it counts. Because what happens is, when you take action and you start to create these reference points for this belief, it starts to create a feedback loop for your brain, which is, do you know what, it's true, I really am the kind of person that doesn't ever miss a workout. So I don't want to touch upon, well, I can give some personal examples if you like, Joachim.
Well, I would first explore a little bit more, like, because I think it's a very, very core thing that you just said, that I absolutely agree that with the whole identity, so it's a little bit of an identity shift when you create a new habit. So But how specifically do you do that? How do you actually start to challenge old beliefs, figure out what old beliefs are, installing new beliefs? Because it seems that this is the foundational principle of any new habit you want to install. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I get a lot of clients and they write this belief about a new habit and it is very unrealistic. And I appreciate their optimism, but they're setting themselves up to fail before they even start. So, for example, if they write down, let's use exercise as the example. If they write down, I'm going to go to the gym 3 days a week, 1 hour a day, and I'm going to not leave until and they set some arbitrary metric. So there's a lot of pressure. It's simpler to say, okay, right now I'm not going to the gym. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on really, really small commitments that will start to change my belief system. So I want to use a personal example for this. Coming from a background where I was very, very shy in my early 20s, and I studied NLP, as I'm sure you're very familiar with as well, Jachym. You know a lot about it, and you understand about designing your reality and so on. And if I just written an affirmation saying, I am confident and I can talk to anyone, my unconscious mind is going to say that's bullshit. However, if I believe about myself, I can take action. Sometimes I can't take action. Then that is going to be an easier belief for me to validate through taking action, if that makes sense.
Okay. So what was the small commitment in this example?
Okay. So BJ Fogg, he's a professor at Stanford University. He teaches a course called Tiny Habits. And what he does is, if you think of a habit as a sequence of actions, so the gym is a great example of this, okay? So when you think of going to the gym, what do you think of? What are all the actions that you think of?
Well, first I have to actually make the decision at home to pack my bag, for example, and I have to make my way there and go to change room. So there are many, I guess, many little steps that lead eventually me sitting on the bench and doing presses or whatever it is that my exercise will be. So yeah.
Absolutely. So we think of these series of actions. With the gym, we think about, oh, I need to go home, I need to pack my bag, I need to drive to the gym, I need to get dressed, I need to exercise, I need to shower. Maybe 12 actions we think about. So instead, what we do is we focus on the first action in that sequence, and we commit to it. I really like what Leo Babauta says about make it so easy for yourself that you cannot say no. So if I'm doing charisma coaching with a client, for example, I don't say to him, okay, go and start a conversation with that person. That's terrifying. But I do say, all I want you to commit to every day for the next week is to make eye contact with 3 people a day, smile, and say hello. That's it. I don't even care what the outcome is. Because what will happen is you'll start to condition your brain that A, you are the kind of person that takes action, and therefore validating this belief that you have about yourself and what you can do. And B, there is not that much of a gap between the first step and the remaining sequential steps. So exercise is an amazing example of this. The way I built my gym habit, I've been going to the gym for 6 months now, and I think I've missed 2 sessions, one due to illness and one due to a commitment that couldn't be met at any other time. So let's look at the habit cycle for this. So what is my cue for going to the gym? My cue is to pick up my pre-packed gym bag, which is by my shoes, by my front door, in the morning. The routine is I go to the gym. The reward is I get to go home and have a really tasty protein shake, and I get to validate myself for taking action, right? That also uses choice architecture, which we'll talk about in a moment. So I don't worry about the rest. I don't worry about the workout. I don't worry about the shower. I don't worry about warming up. I don't worry about any of that. All I'm focusing on is I'm just going to commit. I'm just going to commit to picking up my bag and walking out the door. That's all I'm going to commit to. Because what you'll find is, granted, we are creatures of habit, but we are also creatures of completion. So whatever we start, we really want to finish. And a lot of people say to me, oh, I really hate doing the dishes. And I say, this is what you do. You wash one dish and you just stand there and you just meditate on that, what you've just done. Because you're not going to wash one dish and then sit back down and do nothing else, right?
Yeah, okay. So basically, you're kind of a little bit tricking yourself by, I just do the first action. But my question is, what if I do the first action? So, for example, I do the first dish, and then after this, I'm like, I still don't feel like doing the second dish. Do you be like, okay, I just do a second dish, or how do you deal with this little, with this little self-talk that happens where it's like, I did the first one, but do I really should do the next one? Because it will lead, then you start to project again into the future. All will lead to me doing all this, So how do you deal with this kind of projection that prevents you doing this?
It's a really good question, because you know that you're tricking yourself. You being a hypnotist, I'm sure you're very familiar with the concept of compliance. Okay, so I started looking at the idea of self-compliance. So what do I need to do in order for me to take action? So what do I need to do in order for me to go to the gym? So if I'm feeling really tired, or I'm busy, like, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to start that sequence of actions? Oh, I'd have to pick up my gym bag. Could you do that? Could you do that now? Yeah. And I'll do it. And I know that once I've done that, I'm going to follow through with the rest of the actions. Even if my brain is saying, oh, but I think a lot of that, again, comes down to mindfulness and presence. It's just be present with what you're doing now. It's like going to a job interview and telling yourself, oh, what's the point? I'm going to retire one day anyway. What's the point? It's just when you future project, I mean, what's the point in doing anything? What's the point in getting into a relationship, because it might end one day? So I think we have to really bring a certain element of presence into our lives when we're doing habits. When I was writing my book, I used exactly the same principles. I wrote 500 words a day, and when I'd written the first 1,000 words, it could have been easy for me to say, oh, I've got to do this tomorrow, but every day I'd just say, all you need to do today is just just write those 500 words. It's going for those small wins, because when you celebrate small wins, you're giving yourself permission to feel good about taking action. And we don't really do this. When we think about behaviors, generally, going to the gym, eating healthily, flossing, exercise, whatever it is, we think about the routine. We don't think about the cues. We don't think about the rewards. So it's so important to introduce really strong rewards when we're building new habits. And then I'm digressing a little bit here, and I really want to answer your question. So I know that you're saying, well, what if I have this? Oh, but I've only done one. I've got to do the rest of it. So I think the best approach is you have to be mindful with, okay, this is just what I'm doing now. But you'll find that will find that once you start, like, it would be stupid to stop. Like, I mean, some people do it. It fascinates me. Speaking to a client recently, he said that he drove to a class and then he just drove home again, which just blew my mind, because you've driven there, you're there. Like, why would you go home? We have to choose the path of least resistance. So this idea is, once you've started, like once you've turned on the hot water and maybe you've put the gloves on and you've filled the sink, like, it's actually harder to stop, isn't it? Like, it's actually easier to keep going. So we have to trick ourselves to start, and that's all we need to focus on in that moment.
Okay, so now with the example of the client, would he be still congratulating himself for actually driving there, even though afterwards he didn't go to the class, he drove back for whatever reason? But would he, in this principle, would you still like, okay, I did the first step, that's great, or how do you go about that?
That's a great question. So I think if it's more than he's already doing, then absolutely. For example, if you're really shy, I mean, again, I'm coming from this place myself where, I used to be really, really shy. I couldn't even make eye contact with people. But I was learning. It's very interesting. I got to the level where I was becoming a coach and so on, because I was actually learning habit without really knowing what I was doing. Because what I was doing is, I really wanted to talk to girls, and my cue for talking to girls would be if a girl smiled at me. We all know that that's a cue to go over and start a conversation. And the reward is, oh, they were really nice, or oh, I felt really good when I did it. So this is all going on unconsciously. A lot of the time we don't even realize it. But just having this framework makes it a lot easier to build new habits. So I think the only time that you don't reward yourself is if you don't take action. I think I talk a lot about this in the book. This idea of resistance. You always encounter resistance with forming new habits. So I identify that there's two kinds of resistance. There's static resistance and then there's kinetic resistance. So static resistance would be the obstacles that you face before you've even started. So let's say, for example, if we use the example of exercise again, if you don't have a job, that's going to be static resistance because you need money for a gym membership. If you don't have the correct exercise attire, that's going to be a problem as well. Kinetic resistance is quite interesting because those are the obstacles that you encounter a little bit further on down the line. Maybe a lot of them that you haven't actually considered. So what you can do is you can use what's called an implementation intention. Really, really cool little technique that you can use. And it's basically an if-then strategy. So what you do is you look at what your most likely obstacles are going to be, and you say, if this happens, I'm going to do this. So when I started off talking to people, my fears were, what if they're rude? What if they ask me to leave? What if they laugh at me? And what's quite interesting is, call it a fear evaluation, is any kind of resistance that you're feeling in your life, there's usually an undertone of fear that you haven't identified. It can be an ecological reason. Let's say, for example, that you smoking, again, a great example. Let's say all your friends are smokers and you want to quit smoking. That's going to create cognitive dissonance. That's going to create conflict in your values. If you want to quit smoking, but all your friends do, and that's what you actually bond over. So look at what your obstacles are, most of which you'll be able to identify. It's quite interesting. There's very rarely more than 5. And the most common ones are your emotional state, a change in routine, a lack of resources. Let's say, for example, you're going to the gym and then you lose your job. It's not going to become a priority anymore. And you say, right, if this happens, I'm going to do this. So let's say, for example, with conversation skills, let's say you really want to take action, you want to talk to more people, and you say, what if they're rude? And you say, if they're rude, then I'll speak to somebody else. Or what if they don't hear me? Then I'll speak up louder next time. What if they ask me to go away? Then they're not worth my time anyway. And just simply having this if-then strategy, granted you can't prepare for every eventuality, but just having the main ones down, just so powerful, because you're just strategizing how you're going to work through your obstacles.
Okay, so to make it really, I will try to summarize it a little bit. But if I'm now, watching this or listening to this, and I actually want to build a habit, for example, meditation or exercise, right? And I want to do it, then if I understood correctly, the first thing I have to do is basically start to think about my beliefs, right? What are my belief system? What I think about myself, and then see what would be a good belief that I actually do every day, the exercise or meditation or self-hypnosis.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
So this is going to be a simplification. It's actually a 10-step process that I outline in the book. I'm going to try and simplify it as best as I can here. So firstly, identify what the habit is that you want to do, and why that is. Is society telling you that you should be doing it, or is it something that you really want to do? I would also say about, just for leverage, to associate pain in your nervous system to not doing it and pleasure to doing it. Don't really have time to go into that now, but I'll just go through this process as concise as I can. So then what you need to do is you need to identify what the cue is going to be for you to do that habit. So meditation, great example. I love meditation, and this is how I built it into my life as well. So what is my cue going to be? So what I want to mention with cues as well is make a list of pre-existing habits that you already have, that will be really good cues to use. So what's something that you do every day? Go to the bathroom, shower, make a cup of coffee, brush your teeth, right? These are pre-existing cues, pre-existing habits that will work as cues that you can do. So what's even better than that is if you can build a new habit while doing something else, so you're not losing any time. So what I mean by this is, let's say you want to meditate for 3 minutes every day. So this is one goal that I had. So what I did is I looked at my pre-existing cues. I make a cup of coffee every morning, and I built this new habit into a pre-existing habit. So I turn the kettle on, and that's my cue to sit down and meditate for 3 minutes. Kettle takes about 3 to 4 minutes to boil. I'm not losing any time by building this new habit into my life. At the same time, I'm replacing habits I don't like about myself. Let's say, for example, on the commute, I would always check my social media. Now I've got the Kindle app on my phone. That's a new habit that I built in there. And I'm always reading. Oh, we've got another person joining us. Wonderful. I always will choose to read now instead of going on social media. Next, what I'll do is I'll identify, okay, what is the reward that I'm going to give myself for building this new habit? So there's two kinds of rewards, intrinsic rewards and extrinsic rewards. So intrinsic rewards are emotions that you're giving yourself permission to feel. So let's say, for example, if I meditate, I'm going to self-congratulate and feel really happy that I took action. And an example of an extrinsic reward would be I can eat a piece of chocolate. In fact, just to segue in, actually, there was a study done into how to motivate dieters to go running every morning, and what they did was they introduced an extrinsic reward, which was a piece of chocolate. So they go for a run, and then they can have a piece of chocolate. And something very interesting happens is if you introduce an extrinsic reward, eventually it becomes intrinsic. So what the study found was over time, after a couple of weeks, they didn't want the chocolate anymore because they started to feel really good in themselves from biological processes going on in their minds. They're feeling endorphins pumping in their blood. They're feeling this new self-concepts becoming in alignment with who they really are, and they no longer needed the extrinsic reward. So identify what the reward is going to be, and then decide what the action is that you're going to commit to. So be very, very specific with this. So meditation, just commit to 1 minute. Like, that's so easy to do. Like, if you can't do that, that's crazy. Like, who doesn't have 1 minute? People make excuses all the time with, oh, you know, I don't have time to do this, and I don't have time to do that. You do. You just haven't prioritized the time properly. So decide what the smallest action you're going to take is going to be. If it's meditation, it's I'm just going to meditate for 1 minute, and I'm just going to do this for 1 week. That's all. That's the only commitment I'm going to have. If it's running in the morning, believe it or not, all I'm going to do is put my running shoes on. I'm going to put my running clothes on for a week. I'm not even going to go running. I'm just going to put my running attire on. Because you'll start to condition your brain that you can take action, that you're running new patterns. It's very, very interesting. Two more things that I want to mention as well. The first is
before you go in there, can you repeat one more time slowly what each step is? So, you know, if people are writing, they have it in one clear, concise place that they know. Okay, first step, second step, third step. Because that was a lot of good information. I just don't want it to get lost.
I'm cramming everybody's brains full of information. So I do apologize if I'm speaking quickly. So I will slow down again. So identify what the habit is and why you want to do it. Do you have a good enough reason to do it to begin with? Is it something that you are going to commit to in the long term? Be really honest with yourself. Then what you need to do is bear in mind the habit cycle. You need to choose a trigger or a cue that is going to be, think of it as a reminder as well. The cue is also a reminder for you to do this behavior. So when I brush my teeth, I'm going to do a gratitude routine. Or when I turn on my kettle, I'm going to meditate for 3 minutes. Then what you need to do is identify, well, what am I going to get from doing this new behavior? Because my brain needs to have a reason to remember this. It needs to create emotion in me so that my brain craves it and wants to feel rewarded again in the future. So
can I stop you real quick? For example, with exercise or our activities, the reward might be in the future because it might be very painful for some people in the routine that they're not enjoying, or even after, like, no, the body's so worn.
Yeah, sure.
So how do you go about the third, what I'm going to get when I do this specific habit? Can it be a construct for the future? For example, oh, I have a hot body, or I feel so healthy, or something like that. Is that enough?
Yeah, it can be anything that you would find rewarding. So even if it sounds counterintuitive, like I mentioned with the previous step about the piece of chocolate, that sounds so counterintuitive, doesn't it? Why would you give chocolate to dieters when they're running? But what is happening is there is this shift that takes place, and the extrinsic reward is no longer needed, and you start to feel intrinsically rewarded instead. So granted, I know even for someone that's in shape, when I went back to the gym in January, it was a very painful process. And not only physically painful, but I was going there, I didn't really know what I was doing. I hadn't done the research I needed to do yet, and you're weak, and it's just horrible. So you have to have that reward that's going to carry you through until it starts to become really, really rewarding.
Okay, so I see. It can be completely like the chocolate. A piece of chocolate can be something that doesn't need to be like in far future. It can be quite immediate. Probably it is even recommend to have it quite immediate, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was the third thing. The third step. What is the next one? Do you remember where you were?
Yeah. So the next step is you need to identify what the smallest action you're going to commit to is going to be. So in the beginning, it's going to be so small. It's going to be based on very, very low self-compliance. So the example I like to give is, think of compliance as jumping through a hoop. So, Joachim, if you and I were having a coffee and I said to you, oh, Joachim, can you pass me the sugar? And it's behind you. Like, that's quite a small compliance hoop for you to jump through, isn't it? But if I said to you, oh, I'm just going to the bathroom, can you pick up the tab? And while you're at it, can you ask the waitress for her number? That's quite a big compliance hoop. That's quite a lot that I'm asking of you. And we do this to ourselves as well, is this idea of self-compliance is we need to make the self-compliance hoop really, really, really small. I've had days where, I really didn't feel like writing, or I really didn't feel like going to the gym, or I really didn't feel like meditating, or I really didn't feel like eating healthily. And I would make that self-compliance hoop so small that I would feel like an absolute idiot if I didn't do it. Like, I've literally sat down before and written to myself, just write one sentence. So I write the one sentence, and then I sit there and I'm mindful of what I've just done, and I think, oh, I can take action, because it all comes back to taking action. Everybody has this all or nothing approach. They either have to go all in or not at all. So people either have to go to the gym regularly or they don't go at all. People either have to eat healthily regularly or they don't do it at all. It's okay to miss days. It's okay to fail, and I use that in a very loose sense of the word, because what happens is you'll find out what your obstacles are. I'm going to give you a really good example of this. I spoke earlier on about using the kettle as a cue for meditating, and it was such a brilliant cue. But if I was traveling or I slept at someone's house, guess what? No habit. And I wouldn't see that as a failure. I just saw that as a learning opportunity to introduce a new cue. So now what I do is, regardless of where I am in the world, I do it immediately. As soon as I wake up, the first thing I do is I do my morning meditation. So just get back to the steps. There's a couple of other steps I really want to mention as well, if I may go into those, unless you had any further questions on those.
No, I think that covers it quite nicely. The only thing that I'm realizing is that the being present and negative talk it seems to be quite important that you, even when you take the small step, that you stay present, because when I try at the beginning, for me it was like, okay, I just do it so I get it over. So I just get in, do the small step, and then just get out. And I realized, well, because I'm already giving like this pre-talk before, instead of just saying, okay, I commit to the first step and like basically come from a blank canvas, from a blank sheet. I just do the first step. I just notice how it feels. It's a completely different approach. So I think the whole mindfulness is again, as in other webinars, it's a very important concept.
Yeah, it really is. I'm really glad that you mentioned that, Jachym, as well, because I really want to demystify the whole woo-wah, psychosocial, it's a Slipknot song, pseudoscientific attribution to meditation. It's not like that at all. Mindful meditation, in fact, if you Google habits of successful entrepreneurs, meditation always comes up. Ray Dalio, he's a hedge fund manager of Bridgewater Associates. He said that meditation is the reason why he's a multi-billionaire. And it's got nothing to do with being closer to God, not that that's a bad thing, or chanting or anything like that. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about meditation. It's simply quieting your self-talk, because your ego is going to be trying to sabotage you all the time. And by being mindful and being present with what you're doing and going into that flow state and going into flow motion, as I like to call it, you can't even hear your self-talk. One little tip I just want to give people now that they might find useful is if you feel any resistance with doing a new behavior and you're in your head and you're listening to your self-talk and you're having this you're having this dialogue between your self-talk, just put all of your focus into a part of your body, very similar to what you and I did with the Huna meditation with Marcus, is put all of your focus into a part of your body, because even if it's only for a few moments and it's fleeting, you're out of your head. So by meditating every day, imagine how good you get with this over time as well. The other thing that I wanted to mention on that point as well is we don't really have time to talk about impulse control today, but it's okay to have these impulses. We have these impulses for sugar, for sex, for sleep, and we tend to act on them immediately. And I'm going to try not to digress too much, but there was a study done into immediate gratification versus delayed gratification, and your ability to delay your gratification and understand that habits pay dividends in the long term is what is going to help you with your goals in the long term. So understand that there is no immediate payoff right away. But by being mindful of that, it's really going to help you in the long term. I think people just put so much pressure on themselves really unfairly to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to summarize again, so we have like four steps. What is the habit and what is the reason that you want to do it? You have to choose the trigger or cue that reminds you to do the habit. And then you have to ask what I'm actually going to get when I do it, right? So the immediate gratification.
Yeah.
And what is the smallest action you're going to commit to that you're going to take?
Yeah.
What's the next step?
So there's 10 steps in total, but I just want to give the bare bones. The other two really big components of this as well is public accountability. So whenever people try and implement a new behavior and they say, oh, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to eat healthily, or I'm going to write every day, or whatever it is, nobody, excuse my language, but nobody gives a shit whether you do it or not. There are no consequences, right? There are long-term consequences. If you don't lose weight, it's going to be problematic in the future. If you don't learn how to overcome your shyness to the point where it's causing you problems, it's going to cause you problems in the future. And again, it all comes down to we always choose the path of least resistance, this idea of short-term pain versus long-term pain. We have to accept that we need to endure short-term pain for long-term pleasure. And most people tend to think of short-term pleasure, but then endure long-term pain. So what I would recommend you do is you find someone that is going to hold you accountable for your actions. So last year, I decided to get my sleep cycle in order after years of really bad sleeping habits. I was going to bed in the early hours of the morning, waking up early, feeling groggy. It was affecting my diet and so on and so forth. Remind me to talk about keystone habits a little bit later on. That's my alarm. Just ignore. So it's very distracting. Just bear with me.
That's okay. Don't worry.
Oh, incidentally, I should mention actually. Let me see. That actually for something habit related, which I'll come back to afterwards. So we're talking about accountability. So I decided that I wanted to get my sleep cycle in order. So what I decided to do is, okay, for the next 30 days, every weekday, I'm going to go to bed before 12 p.m. Now, I knew that it wasn't enough for me to just say I'm going to do that. I know that I'm going to let myself off the hook. So I wrote on my blog, this is my declaration, this is what I'm going to do, and I introduced a forfeit for if I didn't do it, which for me was, if I don't do this, I'm going to have cold showers for the rest of the month. And I really hate cold showers. So every time I felt resistance, and it was like 1 minute to 12, and I was on my laptop, and then I realized, oh shit, I don't have cold showers tomorrow, close my laptop, jump into bed. Because having that accountability mechanism is going to ensure that you stick to it for a predetermined amount of time and not mess up the process when you're just on the brink of breakthrough. So there's a great website called beminder.com. BEE, and it's a website where you can find a private adjudicator or referee that's going to hold you accountable for your new behavior. And if you don't do it, I believe what they do is you have to donate money to an anti-charity. So an anti-charity is a charity that you would hate to see your name associated to. The George W. Bush Memorial Library seems to be a popular one. That's not a political opinion, that's just based on the data. So maybe you don't have a blog, that's fine. Go on this website or find someone that you know is not going to let you off the hook and introduce stakes, introduce a forfeit if you don't do it. Something that you're going to find really, really painful. And you'll be amazed. You will do it. There's a reason why you go to your job, because if you don't, you will get fired. Those are stakes. So find what you would really not want to do as a forfeit and introduce that as an accountability mechanism. And a lot of people won't do this because they know they're going to let themselves off the hook. It's a really important part of the puzzle for committing to habits long term.
Yeah, I've tried myself, and I can agree it is quite a powerful mechanism that you can install. Is there another step for this, or are those 5 the bare bones?
There's one more thing, just on the topic of accountability, and then I'll move on to the last point as well. So a lot of people will just immediately assume, oh, well, I'll put money at stake because that will motivate me to take action. But if you're not particularly driven by money, it's not going to work. So think about what I like to do is, what emotion would I most like to avoid? For me, it's discomfort, physical discomfort. So having a cold shower, that's really unpleasant. And if I don't have cold showers, then it's going to be unhygienic. Like, I have to shower. I'm one of these people that showers every day. So it's going to cause me so much discomfort. If I don't stick to this habit, it's going to cause me so much discomfort. And I really want to avoid that. That is pain that I want to avoid. So I'm going to choose the path of least resistance and do this habit. So the final point, the final part of this, if you will, is choice architecture, what you wrote in the copy for the meetup. So choice architecture is a term from the book Nudge. Really interesting study done. There was a woman who was a food director for a high school, and what she did is she decided to redesign the environment to see how it affected sales, but without changing any of the prices. So what she did was she replaced a number of the refrigerators with water instead of soda. She put carrot sticks at eye level. She put the desserts at the beginning of the queue rather than at the end. And healthy food prices went up by 25%. Really, really interesting. So the point is your environment is so conducive to you doing well in your habits, you cannot believe. So I alluded to it a little bit earlier on about my gym bag is by my front door, and it's pre-packed. And it's about minimizing as much resistance as you can. Always do my laundry, so my gym clothes are always clean. I'm by my door, and it's the last thing I see before I leave the house. If you're, let's use another example. Let's say that you're watching too much television and you don't like it. Increase the number of steps that is necessary for you to do the habit. So instead of just sitting down and turning on the television, take the remote control, take the batteries out the remote control, and put them in 2 different places in your house. Because then if you really want to do it, then you'll do it. But you'll find that, it's more resistance, so you probably won't do it. There's a book, I forget the name of the book. There's something called activation energy. It's a book I read, it's a concept I read about in a book on the science of happiness. And the way activation energy works is just make it as easy for yourself as possible to do what it is that you want to do. So if you're learning how to play guitar, don't leave your guitar in a closet and you have to take it out, because even that's creating resistance. Put it somewhere where you're going to play it all the time. Healthy food, this is a great one. So, wrapping your leftovers in tin foil instead of cling film, even doing that is another barrier, because you're going to have to actually take off the tin foil and see what it is. If you've got a fondness for sugary foods, it goes without saying, don't keep them in your house. If you do have to keep them in your house, put them somewhere where it's going to be an effort for you to get them, and so on.
Okay, cool. So those are the 6 major steps for creating a good habit. Now, what are the key principles that you actually will stick to it? Are there anything that you haven't covered yet that you would say, okay, that is necessary if you want to have a long-term habit that you want to change or that you want to implement newly, that you have to take care that you will stick to it for life, if you want that?
Sure. So I think it goes back to identity. If you are the kind of person that does this behavior, it doesn't matter how you're feeling, the change in routine, you're going to do it, because they're going to be behaviors that are in alignment with your self-concept. So, for example, reading, I have to read every day. I couldn't not read. Even when my Kindle broke a few weeks ago and I had to ship a new one to Sweden, I was downloading the Kindle app on my phone, and I was reading while I was walking. I had to read, because my self-concept is I'm somebody that reads. I'm somebody that really enjoys reading. With every habit that I have, bearing in mind that habits change over time as well, and let's say, for example, you're learning a new language, but let's say that you move country, then learning that language is no longer important because you've moved country. But you'll find that maybe another habit will replace it. So understanding that habits replace habits is very interesting as well. And to commit to it in the long term, I don't know if I'm going to be going to the gym like I am at the moment for the rest of my life. Probably not. But I do know that another similar habit will replace it. Maybe, like right now I'm really into strength training. Maybe I'll start running, or maybe I'll start spin class or something like that. So understanding that the habit, this is like kind of interesting. The main area of my focus now in the last 12 months has been the maintenance of habits. And one thing that I'm really fascinated by at the moment is, are you familiar with, in economics, the law of diminishing returns?
No. Maybe I know a different term, but not that one, no.
So this idea of, what is your favorite dessert, Jachym?
Tiramisu.
Tiramisu, right? So if you had tiramisu right now, if you were to quantify your happiness on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you say? Out of 10, if 10 was the highest, how would you feel if you had a plate of tiramisu in front of you now?
6 or 7.
6 or 7, right? So if you had it every day, you probably find that number would scale down over time. Would that be fair to assume?
Yeah.
So this is what I found to be really interesting now with habits, and this is something, as far as I know, no one else is talking about, is you have to update your rewards for your habits when you're no longer feeling the habit cycle has momentum. So I noticed a couple of weeks ago I was starting to lose my momentum with going to the gym. I was losing my motivation, which I couldn't understand. And I had to change what my rewards were, because listening to a podcast in the gym, which is one of my rewards, no longer was really rewarding because the podcasts I was listening to weren't very good. And I had been drinking the same protein shake for 4 to 5 months. So now I've got a new flavor. Will get me. So you have to identify, okay, it's still rewarding for me, because what's rewarding for you now might not be rewarding for you in 6 months. So to really answer that question, you have to constantly evaluate, is this still rewarding for me? That alarm that went off earlier on in the call, at 9 p.m. every night, I track my habits and I make sure that I did all my habits for that day. If I get a no for a habit 3 days in a row or 3 times in 1 week, that's resistance. I need to look at why I didn't do that. Maybe it's not important to me anymore. Maybe I need to replace it with something else. Maybe that system that I'm using isn't really working now. I'm experimenting quite a lot with productivity at the moment. What is causing me the least amount of resistance? So if you want to really commit to this in the long term, start tracking your habits, at least for the first 30 days, and try and do it every day if you can.
Okay, yeah, so you basically have like a little notebook or some kind of sheet that you little lines that, okay, I've done this today, I've done this today, I've done this today, right?
Yeah, I find I'm a huge fan of Evernote. I use Evernote religiously, and I have a table in my Evernote. So the table has the habits on the left column, and then on the top it will say, did I do my habit, yes or no? If no, why? What can I do to ensure this doesn't happen again? Sometimes it's really interesting what you can learn about yourself, because there'll be some resistance that you have that maybe that you weren't aware of, that you would have never even considered. So again, it's that kinetic resistance that you're encountering. You're always going to have different obstacles, and it's just about just keep going. And it's not the end of the world if you miss your habit a couple of times, but understanding whether it's still important to you is what is going to help you continue to move forward in the long term.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground today. I mean, you have been going.
It's really hard to condense a 200-page book into 1 hour.
Oh yeah, of course. But I'm sure we have really focused on the practical side. How do you actually establish? And I think with those 6 steps that we have laid out, and the other things that you have shared, people now can confidently try go about the habits and play around with it and see how it works. Are there any things that you wanted to share that you haven't had the chance yet?
Yes, there is actually. I want to talk about some people. They have the wrong approach to implementing a new behavior. So what they'll do is they will just say, "Oh, I'm going to go to the gym after work," and they just think that they're going to do it. Now, there's something called ego depletion or decision fatigue, and what that is, your willpower, your ability to will yourself to do something, it is this depletable resource, and the more decisions that you make over the course of a day, the more you drain that resource. So this is exactly why people give into their temptations in the evening and after work, because over the course of the day, they've had to decide how to prioritize their tasks, what to eat for lunch, even having to fake a laugh out of courtesy at their boss's terrible joke. These are all depleting your resources, right? So what's really useful, there's a really phenomenal book called The Power of Full Engagement. It's a book on peak performance and energy levels. And what's really useful to look at is, when is your energy at its highest? So I go to the gym between 9 and 11 a.m. immediately after a light breakfast, because I know that that is when my willpower is at its highest, and also when my energy is at its highest. Now, what I want to mention here, the whole, if I could summarize this entire webinar in one sentence, it would be that habits trump willpower every time, because once a behavior becomes an unconscious pattern and a habit, you no longer need to think about it. However, there is one caveat to this. You do need willpower to begin with. For those 30 to 66 days, there was a study done into how long it does take to automatize a habit. It takes approximately 66 days, depending on the habit. So you have to understand, okay, it takes willpower to build this habit to begin with. How can I how can I automatize a lot of my decisions that I make on a daily basis so I can conserve my willpower? And I know this sounds very robotic, but don't decide when you're shopping which breakfast cereal to have and really drain all your decision-making resources. Just get a cereal. Just have the same meals every day. When you're on a diet, do a meal plan and save your willpower for when you really, really need it. Willpower is depleted a lot as well by if you're underslept, if you're not sleeping well, if you're not getting 7 to 9 hours sleep a night, if your blood sugar level is low as well, that really affects your decision making. If you're interested more in willpower, there's a phenomenal book called The Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal. Really phenomenal book. I really recommend that as well. One more thing I wanted to mention, Jachym, as well, and maybe we can go into some questions. I don't know what you had planned. One more thing that I wanted to mention is you have what are called keystone habits. Now, keystone habits they're like foundational habits that if you focus on one, it creates like a cause and effect in others. So a good example of this is sleep. If you sleep really, really well every night and you wake up really easily, you're probably going to eat more healthfully. You're probably going to feel more motivated to go to the gym. You're probably going to feel more productive. And what happens is if you focus on building keystone habits, positive thinking, another good example, doing a gratitude routine, it's going to affect all these other habits as well. So lastly, the final point as well is it's very easy to become very overwhelmed by building all these new habits into your life. Just focus on one, start with one. The first habit I ever built was just going to bed early. And even now it's crazy, still go to bed before 12 p.m. Sometimes even on weekends, it's crazy. And that in itself as well is a keystone habit. And I noticed that since I did that, I started eating more healthily, I started feeling more productive, it actually stimulated my creativity as well. All of these knock-on effects that came from just focusing on this one habit.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a crucial thing what you said. Start with one habit and then go from there, because so many people are like, I'm going to change my life right now and I'm going to do everything differently, and it's just a little bit too much at one time. So I think it's very crucial to. It comes again to what you said about taking small steps, commit to one step, commit to small changes, and because the small change will accumulate and will become a big change eventually, right?
Absolutely.
Good. If you have nothing else right now, I mean, I know you can probably talk about this for hours and hours because you've written a huge book about it.
Yes.
If you have nothing else planned, then I will open the question and answer section here. So if someone has a question about how they can implement a certain habit or about the content, then shoot it now. You can write it in, or I can unmute you if you want, and you can actually ask a question. We'll give you a few minutes, and if there are no more questions, I will end the call.
Okay. Just in the event that I don't have a chance to mention it, just while it's fresh in my mind, if anybody is interested in reading a free chapter from the book, I've created a page just for people on this call. If you go to samuelthomasdavis.com, Davis, Davies, /meetup, there's a free chapter of my book available there. I checked the link today, so it should be good to go.
Is that written correctly? samuelthomasdavis.com /meetup in the chat box.
Let's see. Can't see it.
Okay. Well, do you have the chat box open?
Yeah, the last comment I see is from Ian.
Yes, one up, just one line up. There.
There it is. Sure. samuelthomasdavis.com. Yeah, that should work.
Okay, perfect. Now, yes, Ian has a question. Do you want to take it on?
Yeah, sure. So, can you talk more about how the evening is a bad time for giving into bad habits and how to avoid such bad habits? Yeah, that's a great question. So again, this comes down to decision fatigue. So over the course of the day, you've been making a lot of decisions, and I should mention actually there's a study done by Duke University, and they discovered that approximately 40% of your daily behaviors is habit. So that leaves room for 60% of your daily behaviors to be random decision making. that just completely drain your resources. So what you can do is you can preemptively plan for this. So maybe Ian can give an example of what this bad habit is, and I can go into a little bit more detail. So maybe we can come back to this question.
Yeah, so just give an example of what such a bad habit would be, Ian.
Drinking alcohol to relax. Okay, so I'm presuming that you probably have alcohol at home, and you probably, I would presume, enjoy drinking a beer from a pint glass as well. Drinking alcohol to relax. Not at home, though. Okay, interesting. So is that with your friends in a bar? Okay, so what I would, let me just read this, drink at home, but...
Yeah, and if you want, we can unmute you and you can actually, explain more detailed.
Yeah, that would be a lot better, I think.
Would you like that, Ian? Would you like that I unmute you?
You can do it, Ian. He's okay. Okay, so I'll try and answer this as best as I can then. So let me just revise this. So drink alcohol to relax, not at home. Yes, I drink at home, but I don't keep beer at home. Okay, I'm going to try and interpret this question as best as I can. So maybe you can help with this as well, Jachym. So am I right in understanding that Ian doesn't have alcohol at home? Oh, yeah. He has to know about it.
Well,
okay.
I would just focus on in general, like if someone drinks for relaxing at home, they want to change the habit. And you said that the decision is depleted, right? Because you deplete. So now you're at home and you have this bad habit, especially at night, that you want to relax with whatever kind of alcohol, right?
Yeah.
So how would you go about that of not falling into the trap because you've been depleted over a day, going into that bad habit?
So the first thing I would do is I would look at what is the reward that I'm getting from drinking alcohol. So for example, if you're going to a bar in the evening, it's probably not alcohol that you're really finding rewarding. It's probably the social aspect of interacting with your friends. It may be the bar itself that you like. There's a number of reasons why you will find that rewarding. So if you're drinking at home, what you can do is you can use choice architecture to begin with. So increase the number of steps that you would need to take in order for you to do the habit. So let's say, for example, you like to pour yourself a beer into a pint glass. So firstly, don't buy beer. And if you have beer in the house, put it somewhere where it would be difficult for you to get to, and put your glasses in another room in the house. I read this great story about a woman that had a problem with spending on a credit card, and what she did was she put it in the freezer. She froze her credit card so that she had time to actually think about what she was doing before she actually took action. So I would change the environment in a way that it makes it difficult for me to do that. And what I would do is I would try and experiment with replacing the routine of drinking with somebody else. Because if you identify that, do you know what, I get home, my sister's a good example of this as well, actually. My sister was talking to me about how she gets home and she has a glass of wine. And I said, why do you do it? And she said, I find it really relaxing. And I thought, interesting, what if you were to meditate instead? Or what if you were to actually replace drinking wine with drinking something that was very sweet or had a similar taste? What if you were to use non-alcoholic wine? So there's lots of experimentation that you can do. If choice architecture isn't enough, you can actually replace the routine, and you've got to find one that will actually satisfy that reward that you're getting from doing it. So hopefully that answers Ian's question.
Yes, Ian, just shoot us a yes or a no. Yeah, okay, perfect.
Yeah, no problem.
Any other questions? By the way, what is your book called?
It's called Habits of Change, How to Change Your Habits When Change is Difficult. It's available on Amazon.
Type it into the chat box there. I will also put it afterwards on YouTube so people can find it. And you can find it on Amazon or something like that.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. And in fact, if you just type in habits of change on Amazon, it will come up. It's also available on my website, samuelthomasdavis.com/books, I think the link is. I have another book as well, The Psychology of Confidence. So for anyone that is interested in implementing confidence as a habit, then maybe that will be useful as well.
Perfect. Okay. What do you do otherwise? Like, do you do Skype coaching, or what are your clientele?
Yeah, I'm actually running a 12-week course online now. It's a lot of fun with changing habits and having accountability. It's a lot of fun to do. Anybody that's really interested in changing this area of their life and looking to really be held accountable for their actions, I'd love to have a conversation with and see if I can help them with that. But Skype coaching is available as well. What I wanted to offer as well, Jachym, is anybody that purchases my book after this webinar today, if they send me a screenshot of the receipt from Amazon or wherever they purchase it from, they can have a free 30-minute coaching session with me, and I can tailor some strategies for changing their habits for them.
Oh, perfect. Wow, that's so much value. I would definitely recommend to take that on. You're sneaky. You made me curious about the 12-week program there. You want to just shed some light on it? I'm sure other people might be interested.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way it works is the first 4 weeks are classroom time. So we meet online on Skype once a week. We have a 2-hour session, and we will look at a module that relates to habits. So we talk about willpower, we talk about impulse control, we talk about habits itself, we also talk about energy and energy conservation. Week 4 to 8 is you implement the habit every weekday, and I have a tracker online that we both check into, and I give you daily coaching, daily monitoring of your progress. And then week 8 to 12 is you're doing the habit on your own to see whether you can actually take the tools that you've learned and apply them without having the accountability, without having to track, and to see whether you can actually do it without having somebody on your back, if you will.
Wow, that sounds like a really cool program. Where can I access it?
If you send me an email, Sam, I can write this down as well. Sam, my at key is deciding not to work. Sam at Samuel Thomas Davis. I can just write it like this: Sam at samuelthomasdavis.com. Send me an email, or you can contact me through my website as well. If you're interested and you want to learn more, send me an email and we'll have a chat on Skype, and we'll see if we're a good fit, and we'll see if we can do something.
Awesome, really cool. Well, if there are no more questions, then I would say we'll end the call. That was really, really content-rich and also very practical. Sam, where are you based?
I'm currently based in Stockholm, Sweden, and I believe Ian may be a member of my meetup, if I recall. Have we met, Ian? No, we haven't met. Not yet. We will, I'm sure. Are you in Stockholm, Ian? No. No matter. Yes, currently in Stockholm, Sweden, and I'll be here for a couple more weeks. I'm going to Russia on a mini retirement very soon. So maybe the next time we speak, Jachym, if we do this again, I'll be calling you from the motherland.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel you have a lot of content to share, especially also about impulse control that might be of interest to certain people that I've mentioned, so maybe we'll do another webinar about that.
Absolutely.
No more questions. Thank you very much for actually coming, showing up, Sam. Really, you have provided a lot of value here, and I'm grateful that you actually did take the time and share all those valuable resources.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I had a really good time, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully we can do this again sometime in the future. And I will definitely be joining your meetup and looking forward to your future webinars as well. I think it's a great thing that you're doing here. You're offering a lot of people really great content. really actionable strategies that they can use to make their life better. And yeah, even myself, I can't wait to see what you have next.
Awesome, thank you. Well, and also thanking everyone for showing up. That was great, and you actually got the chance to ask questions, so that's very powerful. Well, yeah. So with that, I wish you everyone a good evening, and start changing your habits. All right. Bye bye.
All the best.